Good evening all and welcome. I would like to warn you that tonight's episode is extremely graphic and is definitely not for anyone under the age of 18 or the faint of heart. Huge trigger warning, because obviously jail and prison are not fun places to be, and the people who usually are housed there have done some pretty messed up things and continue to do messed up things in those secure facilities, as you're about to find out. So get very uncomfortable and let the darkness take control. I spent some time in the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center, and for a while I was in solitary confinement. Just me, 4 walls, and too much time to think. My cell had bunk beds, though I was the only one there. I'd hang my towel from the top bunk after showers, always in the same spot, but it never stayed there. Almost every day without fail, I'd turn around and find it on the floor. It didn't fall like it slipped. It felt like something threw it, even when I made sure it was secure. I clipped over the rail, and it would end up in the exact same spot on the concrete. At first, I chalked it up to the ventilation or maybe the vibration from the heavy cell doors slamming down the block. But it didn't feel like that. It felt deliberate. The dreams started not long after. I'd see a woman barefoot, wearing an old khaki uniform we didn't use anymore, standing on the upper tier of the block. In the dreams, she would smile at me like we were old friends, and then she'd step off the edge with a sheet tied around her neck. Every time. But the strange part, she wasn't sad. She always looked joyful, like she was finally free, like she was flying. I started to dread sleeping. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, certain that if I opened my eyes fast enough, I'd catch someone watching me from the bunk above. It messed with me being alone in that tiny cell day in, day out. In solitary, you lose your grip on time, your thoughts loop, reality warps. You start questioning everything. What's real, what's not, whether your own brain is turning against you. It wasn't until I moved back into the general population that I told one of the other women about the dreams and the towel thing. She looked at me kind of sideways and then said, "You didn't know?" "Yeah, someone did hang herself in the block a few years ago, from the top tier." My stomach dropped. I hadn't told her about the hanging dream. I hadn't said where I saw the woman step off. I didn't know what to believe now. I've never been someone into the paranormal. I always figured solitary just plays tricks on you, but there's a difference between hallucinations and a shared truth. And now, years later, I wonder, was I alone in that cell? Or was she still there, trying to show me how she made her escape, of sorts? A friend of mine, one of the most genuine, hard-working guys I've ever known, told me this story a while back. He wasn't a criminal or a violent man. In fact, he'd never been known to cause serious trouble before. But life has its way of cornering people, and for him, it all came down to a string of bad luck. A few years prior, he went through a rough divorce. His wife got primary custody of their only daughter, and the court ordered regular child support payment that he never once tried to dodge. He loved his little girl, and lived for the weekends he got to see her. He picked up every extra shift he could just to stay on top of the payments in order to spoil her and take her to the best places and try and give her the best time they could together. But the company he worked for, a mid-sized manufacturing one, began having financial issues. The higher-ups looked at the overtime hours and decided he was too expensive to keep around. And just like that, he was let go. For a while, he tried to make ends meet. He picked up under-table work, sold off what he could, and still sent what little money he had to his ex. But eventually the payments stopped being enough, and court got involved. The next thing he knew, he was behind bars for failing behind on child support. He told me that stepping into county jail for the first time was like entering a different world. The air was heavy. The fluorescent lights never shut off. Everyone had their own rhythm, their own tension. The way people walked was slower, different, with a kind of defensive awareness. He was assigned to a 3-man cell with 2 other guys, both repeat offenders. One of them was twitchy, the other one was quiet and more measured. But you could tell that they had some tension. A few days later, things started going sideways. One of the twitchy ones, Ricky, accused the quieter one, Marcus, of stealing a bag of chips. Just chips. That's how small it started. Marcus, of course, denied it, saying he hadn't touched them. They went back and forth for a few minutes, and my friend just stayed on his bunk, trying to disappear. Eventually, they let it drop, and the 3 of them turned in for the night. A few hours later, at about 3 a.m., my friend was yanked awake by a strange scraping sound. He opened his eyes and saw the low light from the hallway, and saw Ricky standing over Marcus's bunk, with something long and shiny in his hands, a large piece of metal pipe, or maybe a broken mop handle. Before he could even sit up, Ricky brought it down again and again. Marcus barely had time to scream. The blows were wet, dull, thudding, and continuous, one hit after another. It wasn't fast either. Ricky was methodical, like he wasn't just trying to hurt Marcus, but erase his very existence off the face of this earth. Blood sprayed the walls, soaked the sheets, and pooled onto the floor. My friend was paralyzed. He was locked in a cell with this monster, and he said the noise was the worst part, not the screams. Those were awful, but the sound of the impact, like a watermelon wrapped in wet towel. Eventually, Marcus stopped moving, just slumped there, his face unrecognizable. My friend couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and was convinced that Ricky was now going to turn his anger onto him and turn him from a regular person to a puddle of blood and a lump of meat. Ricky backed away slightly, panting, his hands and arms slick with blood. He dropped the pipe and stood there, staring down at what he'd done. The guards came eventually. They'd been slow to respond to the noise, probably used to guys fighting and shouting. And when they opened the cell and saw the carnage, everything went in slow motion. Sirens, barking commands, more guards rushing in. They yanked my friend out, cuffed him, even though he hadn't moved from his bed, and Ricky went without a fight. He just sat down and waited. Later, they found the chips, unopened, still in Ricky's mattress. He'd had them the whole time. My friend was released not long after, but he still has the nightmares. He said there was no unseeing something like that, no way to scrub it from your mind. And the worst part wasn't just the brutality. It was how easily it happened, how small the spark had been. A bag of chips, a moment of paranoia, and then a man was dead. That story stuck with me. A reminder that prison isn't just dangerous. Sometimes it doesn't take more than a single breath, one toe out of line, and everything can go very wrong, very fast. I spent a year in a New York prison, medium security dorm. A kid had apparently found a way to hang himself in the bathroom at some point in the past. I swear to Christ, we would all jump out of our bunks when someone would slam this one particular stall door in the middle of the night. Even the corrections officer would run in and look. There'd be no one there but a swinging stall door. I and some of the other inmates believed it was the same being, but there was a shadow that would roam through the whole dorm, and you could strongly sense it, a hair-raising feel. One night I woke up, feeling like it was around. I peeked over the divider to see it slowly hovering around, peeked over at the corrections officer, and his gaze was fixed on this thing. It was like he was shocked, but in a trance, watching it. I never did ask him about it. My wife used to work in nursing homes. Just as crazy stuff happens in those places too, they had a death cat. It was a rescue cat from a local shelter that was brought in as a sort of therapy thing for residents. Well, the cat didn't want to be bothered unless you're about to die. If that cat was seen actually sitting within/near a certain resident, there was a 99% chance that person would die 24 hours later, and the cat was never wrong. I was locked up in juvenile detention back in the late 70s in California. The place was horrible. You could practically taste the hopelessness in the air. In age, we were all kids, but most of us were already cracked in the mind or carved up inside. No one was innocent in juvie, not even the quiet ones. It was a dog-eat-dog world there. There was this one kid who was around 13. I don't really remember exactly, but we called him Mouse. He was pale, rail thin, and hardly said anything ever. When you looked at him, you knew he was the kind of kid that probably wasn't going to make it. He always had a haunted look in his eyes, like he'd already been through hell before he even got locked up. And then there was Terry. He was about 17, built like a linebacker and mean as a snake. He picked on Mouse from day one, constantly bullying him, verbal abuse, shoving him around in the yard, cornering him in the showers. It wasn't difficult to guess what was going on. Mouse's backside was taking a battering, much to his displeasure. We all saw the way Mouse started shrinking into himself. He barely slept. He flinched whenever someone got too close and stopped eating. Terry was breaking him in more ways than one. For weeks you could feel the tension building, like a storm behind Mouse's eyes. There was something off in the way he moved, like he was calculating something. And then on one quiet, unsuspecting night, it happened. It was right before lights out. The unit was quiet. The guards had done their walkthrough, and everyone was either back in bed or pretending to be. I was half asleep when I heard a strange shuffle, and then a hard crack, and then screaming. I sat up and I saw something I'll never forget. Mouse had Terry on the floor, straddling his chest like a surgeon. There was a piece of metal in his hand, too clean and perfect to have been made by someone inside. I suspect a guard must have slipped it to him, or another kid. Terry's face was already covered in blood. Mouse had hit him hard from behind, probably knocked him out, then with terrifying calmness, took the blade and went for his eyes. He didn't just slash, he removed them, like he knew what he was doing. We all watched frozen. One popped out and rolled over the floor, leaving a red trail. It looked like a peeled grape. Then he went for the torso, slashed his stomach open in one long, deep line. It was horrifying. Next, the smell of blood hit, as guts spilled out onto the floor. Blood pooled fast, soaking into the cracks on the floor. All of it took less than a minute. Mouse moved with speed and precision. No panic, no rage, just cold surgical intent. Like this is how it had been planned for weeks, and it was now his moment to shine. By the time the guards swarmed in, it was too late. They pulled Mouse off the body, but Terry was already gone. Some of the kids were puking, others were crying, but most of us were just stunned. You never forget seeing something like that. Mouse was hauled off to psych the next day. Word was he was committed to long-term, declared unfit for juvie. We never saw him again. But years later, someone I knew looked him up. Turns out Mouse got out, cleaned up, and put himself through school, and became a lawyer. I saw the picture and it was definitely him. The same kid who mercilessly cut out another boy's eyes and gutted him like a deer, became a successful suit-wearing attorney. That fact still rattles around in my head. I'm sharing this story from a hospital prison wing. The hospital isn't that old, built in the 70s, and it's a small town county hospital. We don't take trauma cases, and when one does, it's only to stabilize them until Life Flight or EMS can transfer them to another facility. There are two special rooms I want to talk about, room 123 and 234. They share a wall. Deaths in the room are usually older people and natural causes. The prison wing has been rolling for 8 years or so, and the prisoners who's come in, if they die, it's natural causes. But this one room, set, is just weird. I'm agnostic, atheist, but I can't deny the same thing keeps happening in room 123, and especially 234. There have been several times right before they pass, the inmate talks about a kid in the room, but it's the ones who are delirious before death. Also, there have been several mentally altered offenders, not drug-addled, but actual mental status, who have talked about or completely lost their mind over the kid that was under their bed, or running around and messing with them. One guy became so violent we had to discharge him from the hospital and back to his unit. Occasionally, an inmate with a full mental capacity will mention the TV in another room was so loud he could hear it, said it sounded like a kid's show. I kept my hallway quiet and made sure I couldn't hear the TV in the hall. There's certainly arguments that can be made that the word of mouth got back to the unit about the kid's story, but neither officers nor nurses made a habit of telling the stories to inmates. Besides, we admit offenders from dozens of units, so it's always creeped us out a bit. I am a retired corrections officer for over 20 years. The prison I worked at was made in the 80s, aka the gladiator days, and I had a lot of experiences over the years to the point that they just became part of the job. I was more concerned with the inmates than the ghosts, but the hauntings were real. Full shadow apparitions, voices, objects moving on their own, video footage, cold blasts of air in no AC areas on hot nights, doors unlocking, footsteps. The smells really freaked me out. The smell of strong sweat in areas where no inmates were at. I believe prisons are a hotbed for the paranormal due to the violence, suicide, anger, and mental health that the environment absorbs into it. These are my own personal experiences. We had a mental health building that was converted from a gym. Some offices were built inside the building, like boxes stacked together. After all the apartments were done, officers would do a security check to make sure no inmates were left to verify with our count log. A doctor came to the front entrance asking why he had an inmate still sitting down in his office. We told him that there should not be any in the back. Another staff member said they saw him also, so when they went to check it out, it was very odd because they found nothing. They told the doctor, and he went all white-faced. I had never seen it happen so visually. It was unnerving. He looked like he was going to cry or have a panic attack, and I heard a week later, he quit. We would move chairs with rollers into the hallway and come back later and they would be further down. It was kind of fun really. I really only saw a few doors open on their own as I walked up to go through them. It's like they were making my job easier for me. Not really spooky, just interesting. I also saw lots of shadows. Some would be distinct, like a figure, like some were blobs. Clouds that you couldn't see through. I thought they were like flying insects around certain lights, casting shadows, but the blob would be consistent throughout the same shape. It's hard to explain, but it made for a very interesting shift indeed. Some shadows would give a very negative vibe when seen, others were like, oh look, another shadow. I still hold my breath when I walk into a dark room/area. I keep expecting to see him in the corner of the room, the shadow that haunts the dark. I'll never forget that fear. It was primal, deep, surreal. I get a tingle thinking about it, letting me know what I experienced was real and true. It's been over 6 years since I've worked behind the walls of the California State Prison, and every time I get the tingle, It's like I'm still there, sweating, fearing, and concerned about walking through the area of the prison where I experienced these hauntings. I witnessed something while in prison that still sticks with me. It was early on, just a few days after a new kid had arrived on the unit. He was a younger Mexican guy, quite quiet and kept to himself. He didn't like to draw attention to himself, probably just hoping to lay low and get through his time. But here, in juvenile detention, being quiet isn't always a shield. He didn't last 24 hours. They said he was in there for some serious stuff. A convicted serial molester. 13 counts. People had already informed us before he even made it through the door. The guards didn't waste any time sharing the news, like some twisted welcome package. Everyone knew what that meant. The kind of kid you don't just hate, but despise. No one wanted to be near him. And that night I was lying on my bunk when it started. 8 guys circled him like sharks. The first one lunged forward, driving his knee hard and fast into his throat, pinning him down with brutal force. I could almost hear the wheeze of air struggling to push through. 2 others grabbed a rolled-up sheet, like some kind of weapon, and wrapped it tight behind the kid's knees, then stepped on it, locking him into a cruel arch of helplessness. His body was trapped and he was vulnerable. Then the worst part started. They ripped off his orange jumpsuit piece by piece. One after another, they took 2 turns. No words, no mercy, just cold, calculated cruelty. The silence in the room was broken by the terrible sounds you'd expect. Ragged breaths, stifled cries, the thud of fists, and the weapons they brought, whatever those could be. Occasionally a whispered threat cut through like a razor. I wondered how long it could go on for, why the guards weren't stopping it but no one came. It dragged on for a while. When they finally did come wandering in, long after it was over, it was almost anticlimactic. They called for medical help like it was just some routine thing, like they were checking the temperature, not dealing with a broken human being. The kid was barely alive, his body broken and drained. They tried to help him stand, to load him on the gurney when that didn't happen. And the moment he was upright, everything inside him gave way. Blood, feces, male genetic material hitting the floor in a grotesque waterfall. It was like a bucket of raw rot dumped into the cracked floor. The stench was unbearable. You could taste it in the air. How long they'd held him down for. How merciless they'd been. We all knew what they'd been feeding us for weeks. Red beans and rice night after night. No wonder they were backed up. But this was something else entirely. The next day I asked around trying to make sense of it all. The word was clear. That kid's first night in the dorm wasn't a chance for a fresh start. It was a death sentence. But it wasn't the end. Rumors spread after the surgery stabilized him that someone slipped into the infirmary and they strangled him with his own oxygen tube. And to add insult to injury, they'd shoved a broom handle inside him first, just to be sure he wouldn't survive. There was no paperwork or investigation, just the old brutal law of prison. And through it all, the day just kept rolling. Life goes on in its twisted way, but some things like the smell of blood and betrayal never really fade. At 18 years old, I was arrested for armed burglary. This landed me 2 years in the Florida Department of Corrections. After going through the processing center in Orlando, I was transferred to Lake Butler Correctional, a medical/secondary receiving center in Central Florida. Upon arriving, we were placed in a building known as the Honeycomb, a giant structure in the center of the prison that's covered in cinder blocks facing sideways, making it look like a giant bee's nest. We were assigned to 2-man cells, classic bars and correctional officers patrolling, flexing and talking through in deep southern accents. As anyone who's done time will tell you, everyone has a story to tell, whether it's rumors about guards, inmates, epic tales of past crimes, or legends of paranormal experiences. You're guaranteed a new one with each wave of new arrivals. Naturally, none of us believed, but I still listened to regardless. One was the whispers. The story goes that at 3 a.m. in the disciplinary dorm, aka the box, a spirit will torment inmates at night, whispering to them as they sleep. If you wake, you'll see nothing, but you'll feel a presence in the cell. If you lay back down and ignore the whispers, supposedly, you will be injured in some way, shape, or form. No one I spoke to had ever been in the box at Lake Butler. Most inmates had never been there, as most people in the honeycomb were usually transferred to the main prison in a week or two. I was one such unlucky man. I had gotten into a fight with two gangsters who were trying to collect protection money from non-gang members such as myself. Naturally, 3 men fighting is not a silent scenario. The guards sprayed us with mace, put us in cuffs, and dragged us to the disciplinary wing. I was given 2 weeks solitary confinement and told that if I were to cause any more trouble, I would have my new sentence tripled. Now 2 weeks alone, no prices trying to take your food or act tough sounded easy. In my mind, this would be a cakewalk. I still shudder thinking about how wrong I was. The first 3 days went without incident. Did my morning workout, ate my breakfast, slept for a few hours, woke up, ate my lunch, practiced my art, read a few chapters of my book, ate dinner, work out again, and finally pass out till morning. This was my decided routine that would get me through the next 2 weeks, until the 3rd night. At first I thought the guard was getting my attention for something, so I rolled off the bunk and came to the door, waiting for the slot to pop open so we could speak. It was then I heard the whispers. They weren't coming from the door, but behind me. I turned, seeing no one in the pale moonlight, coming through the 4x12-inch window at the top of my cell. Clearly the solitude was getting to me, I thought as I shuffled back to my bunk. I'd heard stories but never believed any. Ghosts, demons, angels, and all of that just sounded like ridiculous kid stuff to me. As I laid in my bunk, I couldn't help but shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not an uncommon feeling, really. There were cameras everywhere, officers doing regular checks every 15 to 20 minutes, but this felt like someone was in the room with me. Not like they had anywhere to hide. I just had a toilet sink combo. My desk bolted to the wall with a concrete pillar for a stool and a bunk. A quick scan was all I needed to see. I was alone, yet I still felt a presence. The feeling had me awake now. Lockup had developed instincts in me that refused to let me go back to sleep. Adrenaline was coursing through me as my eyes shifted, trying to pinpoint a source of these sounds. First I saw it was coming from the door, then it shifted to my toilet. When I looked under my bunk as if someone was in my right ear, "You're not even close." I shot up, searching frantically, and I ran to the door and started pounding, calling for a guard. No one came at first, then I heard footsteps heavy, storming down the walkway. "What's the issue, inmate? You better be dying in there if you're slamming on the door like that." "There's someone in here," I said through the door. "Can I move to another cell? I swear I'm not messing with you." "Damn ghost stories got to your head, boy," he chuckled. "This ain't funny, man. Please, you gotta let me move, sir." "Piss off and go to bed, before I go in there and knock you out." All I heard were his boots, dropping heavily down the hallway back to his office. Then the whispers were gone. Not even the cicadas outside were buzzing. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding in, and just kind of mentally smacked myself. The guard was going to tell everyone about the kid losing his mind last night after 3 days in confinement. I just made a spectacle of myself for nothing. Feeling foolish, I laid down and passed out, the fear having taken its toll on my body, and I was out like a light in seconds. I was awake in the morning to a loud noise in my cell. 3 guards were standing over me, looking more pissed than I'd ever seen them. "So you think you can throw a temper tantrum on our watch, you little piece of crap?" yelled the guard from last night. "What are you talking about?" I asked as a large hand came across my face, knocking my head to the wall. "You're gonna clean this cell from top to bottom, and to be sure, save all the toilet paper, cause I ain't giving you another roll till next week." I looked around. All my property was strung about, toilet paper everywhere, and my locker door dented as if someone had kicked it repeatedly. Pictures I had been sketching were ripped up and tossed like confetti, and one of my pens had been busted open with a message written on my desk saying, "See you later." I cleaned up the mess and sat there with my head reeling. How had I slept through all that? How had someone gotten into my cell? What happened last night? I sat there just stunned until my shower time when the guards came and cuffed me to take me there. "See what all the fuss you made last night did? You went and got yourself hurt, dumbass," said the guard as he followed behind me. I looked at him questioning. "What are you talking about?" "Lying on your back, idiot. What happened? You catch yourself in the bunk?" "That wasn't there the other day." I turned, and in the reflection of the glass I saw it, a large scratch mark running from my upper right shoulder to the middle of my spine. Then everything went dark. I woke up in the infirmary an hour later. The nurse was demanding a confession from the guard. "We told you no marks. What happens if internal affairs were to show up and see him like this? He didn't look like this when I went over him after that a few days ago. You could lose your job over this, you know that. I'm not covering for you." It was then I sat up. "He didn't do anything to me," I said as I shook, the fog from my head clearing. "See, I told you I didn't do anything. He just passed out on the way to the showers." "Is that true?" asked the nurse. "Yes, ma'am." I then turned to the guard, relief washing over his face. "Can I move cells, sir?" "No problem. Just promise to act right from now on." "Deal." That was my first paranormal experience ever, and it turned me into a believer. To this day, I have never come up with an explanation for what happened. Since my release, I have never been arrested again. I quit all drug use and am now a functioning member of society. I have a family now and 3 beautiful children, and I work 50 hours a week, play with my kids every day, and do my best to direct them on the right path. So far, life has been good. But I'll never forget my stint in prison, my time in solitary confinement, and that cell. I worked in an old jail, and I've seen a few things. At my first department, you had to be vetted through the jail in order to become a patrol deputy. I started in the jail when I was 20 and served a little over a year as a jailer before being transferred to the patrol division and sent to the academy. The jail in question was built in the 60s or 70s and was falling apart when I started working there. I can only imagine what condition it's in today. It was a small jail with 3 housing blocks and held a max capacity of 60 inmates. My first few weeks I was there, I was put with a senior jailer so they could show me the ropes. The standards for working in a detention facility at the time were fairly lax, so anyone hearing this who has worked or is currently working in detention, there'll probably be a few WTF moments in this story when it comes to how we did things. Before I started the night shift portion of my training, I had several employees tell me the story of a jailer who was attacked by something in the booth, the control room where we are stationed. The story was that the jailer was working on paperwork late at night after all the inmates were locked down, and he kept feeling something brush his neck. After he felt it a few times, he turned around and saw a dark humanoid figure perched on the shelf behind him. As he stood, the figure supposedly jumped at him, causing the jailer to run down the steps, out the door of the booth, then out of the corridor to the booking room. The dispatcher, who was 1 room over at her station, saw him, then supposedly called an ambulance because he was unable to speak. The whole incident was allegedly caught on camera, but no one knew where the footage was. I didn't believe this story one bit and brushed it off as a trick they play on the rookies. Once my training was complete, I was placed on night shift by myself. After several weeks of working on my own, I became comfortable being the only one on duty in the jail. I was even to the point where I would play checkers or cards with inmates if they were awake after lockdown. Once everyone was asleep in their cells and I had done my watch tours, I would go to the booth, shut the heavy metal door, and turn on the old TV we had. I was going to college part-time during the day, so if it had been slow and no one had caused any problems, I would set my alarm on my phone for the next hour and take a nap. which was surprisingly accepted behavior in that jail as long as you did your hourly checks. One night I did my checks, set my alarm for 2 a.m, checked the control panel to make sure all the doors were secured and locked, and then dozed off as I had done many times before. This time I awoke after what felt like 30 minutes to my inmate worker, who had stayed up late to finish his laundry, pounding on the plexiglass window to the booth door. Startled, I jumped up, unlocked the door with my key, and asked what had happened. The trustee told me that they had heard screaming in one of the blocks. I ran to each cell block and was alarmed to find every door had been unlocked. I shined my light in each cell and confirmed everyone was asleep and where they were supposed to be, and quietly locked the doors. When I found out that everyone was alive and well, I returned to the booth to find out what had happened. Upon looking at the control panel, every door in the cell blocks had been unlocked manually. This was obviously a strange experience, but as I said, it was an old jail, and the control panel had seen better days. I chalked it up to an electrical malfunction, and the scream the trustees heard as an overactive imagination. Morning came, and all of the inmates emerged from their cells to get breakfast. None of them appeared to have been injured or complained of anything happening in the night. The next few months go by relatively well, with nothing worthy of mentioning occurring. But one night at 5 a.m, my trustee was sitting on the steps of the booth keeping me company as we drank our coffee and were preparing for morning med calls. As I was finishing my paperwork, I caught a glimpse of someone walking around in one of the cell blocks through the booth window. Annoyed at the thought that someone had managed to get out of their cell, I looked at the control panel to find that every door was still locked and secured. I looked back through the window and saw a short brown-haired man with a short brown beard, wearing an orange inmate uniform, slowly walking around the block with his head down. He made the second lap and walked behind a pillar, then didn't appear again on the other side. I popped the block door from the control panel, exited the booth, and then stormed into the block ready to chew this guy out. But when I entered, there was no one there. I walked around the block, shined my light in every cell, and checked every door. Checked in the showers and under every table. Every door was secure, and no one was out of their cell. I looked at my trustee and could tell he was just as confused as I was, and he told me he saw the guy too. At breakfast, I looked at each inmate as they walked up to me to see if the one I had seen in the cell block was among them, but no one came close to matching the description. That morning, I brought it up to one of the dispatchers who had worked there for 20 years. I described to her the man I saw. Without a word, she pulled out the calendar, pointed to the date and said, "Yep, that's him, surely." She saw the look of confusion on my face because she laughed and told me what she meant. She said the description of the man I saw matched that of a man who had hung himself in that cell block several years back on that day. She said he was a repeat customer, as we like to call repeat offenders, and was always hired as a trustee due to his work ethic and good behavior. She said the last time he was brought in, he was a different man, fighting with the jailers and other inmates, talking out of his head and acting absolutely insane. She went on to say that one night the man took a sheet, wrapped one end around the door at the food slot and the other end around his neck, then leaned forward, causing him to asphyxiate and his life to end. The dispatcher claimed the spirit of the man was the one haunting the jail and the one who had attacked the jailer several years back. I began to believe in the haunting after that. As time passed, I experienced several odd occurrences, including office chairs spinning on their own, catching a glimpse of someone looking through the booth window when no one was out, and shadows moving across the walls. Inmates would sometimes report seeing someone in orange walking past their cells in the middle of the night, and a select unfortunate few said they awoke to a third inmate in their two-man cell watching them as they slept. I later met and befriended the guy who had been attacked by the entity. Shortly after the incident, he quit the jail and went to work for another police department in the county. He refused to talk about the incident.
but would say that it was not a joke. When we attempted to poke fun at him about the incident, he would become visibly upset and walked away. Everything in this account could be explained away by electrical malfunction, sleep deprivation, and a number of other contributing factors. But that being said, there are some things that cannot be explained away so easily.
During a stint inside, one of the wildest fights I witnessed started over a game of cards. The stakes weren't cash, obviously, but high enough to matter in there. Canteen items like chips, soda, chocolate bars, ramen, the usual prison currency. One guy called Nero got accused of cheating. He denied it, but things got heated fast. Eventually, the other inmates at the table forced him to show his hand. And yeah, he was cheating. You could feel the mood shift in the air. The two other guys, Tiberius and Caligula, told Nero to come back to their cell block with them just to talk it out. Somehow Nero agreed. Big mistake. Not 5 minutes later, all hell broke loose. All three of them came stumbling out of the cell, fists flying like a hurricane. Tiberius had a radio about the size of a fist and smashed it into Nero's head hard. It cracked apart on impact, and what was left turned into a jagged weapon. They used the broken plastic and metal like a shiv, grinding it into the side of Nero's skull. I swear you could see the bone. Blood was everywhere, slick and dark on the floor like oil. It looked less like a beating and more like a crime scene. That's when the goon squad stormed in, riot gear, tasers and pepper spray ready. By then, Nero was already crumpled on the ground and barely moving. Tiberius went down easy after getting a face full of spray. Horrible stuff, makes your stomach flip. But Caligula, the dude was massive, 6'6", never missed a day at rec. He decided to play tough and charged the officers, which was a bad move, as they lit him up with the taser. But even then he didn't go down right away. He actually managed to shake off half the team like something out of a bad action movie. They hit him again, and that second jolt finally had him drop. Nero got taken out on a stretcher, barely conscious, his face barely recognizable. Because of the overcrowding at the time, they couldn't relocate us during the investigation, so we were locked in our cells around the clock, meaning meals brought to us, zero movement except for the legally required 1 hour a day in a tiny, grim courtyard. No one said a word for days. You could still see the blood stains drying on the floor. No one said a word for days, and I never saw any of the three again. I wonder what happened to the guy. Did he die? I don't know if I'd want to live with my face and body mutilated in the way he would have to be.
I worked in the hole for 2 years. To give you an idea of how this worked, we had paperwork on every cell door identifying who was in the cell and for what reason. As so much happened during the day, the roster was hardly ever up to date. At the beginning of my shift, I would do a security check and count inmates. I had something like 28. There was a gentleman in this cell next to my office with no paperwork, and the count room officer told me no one should be in that cell, so I was like, hang on, let me go ask. I went back to the cell, but now there's no one there. I had several occurrences in adjacent units that were the same way. Turns out me and several other people have had the phantom inmate happen to us. Who he was or why he was there, I'll never know. Maybe another person that took their life and simply can't move on, and is still, figuratively and spiritually, trapped in that prison. Maybe he just wasn't done doing his time. Who knows?
Over a decade ago, I spent time in juvenile detention, specifically the psychiatric unit. 24 individual cells over 2 floors, each one bolted shut at night, twice the guards but half the care. One morning the routine changed. We were told we were going to be locked down an hour early because of a special intake coming through. Tension was thick, and this obviously pissed off everyone. Then, a few minutes before the new guy arrived, one of the guards went cell to cell, pounding on the doors, riling us up. Your new inmate committed SA on 2 minors. They were 2 and 4 years old. His own cousins. He kept shouting that over and over. He wanted a reaction. A few minutes later, the new kid finally arrived. He was 16 years old. They made him stand in the common room while the guards left. And then without a word, every one of our cell doors unlocked. And the place exploded. I still remember the first one out, my neighbor, a wiry, unhinged kid that vaulted from the 2nd level and drop-kicked the new guy like something out of a martial arts film. Then the rest followed, 16 of us, a storm of fists and fury. The guards didn't intervene for at least a full minute, and when they did, they fired beanbags and dragged bodies apart. The new kid was unidentifiable. Broken bones, internal bleeding, torn skin, a mess of blood on the floor. He actually survived the initial attack, but just by the skin of his teeth. They moved him to the infirmary, then transferred him to a hospital, and he never made it back. We heard through the grapevine that his injuries had worsened while in the hospital, and someone had gotten to him again, bit his throat open, mutilated his face, and that he died in a hospital bed not long after arrival. I don't know what's more disturbing, the violence, the guards orchestrating it, or how quickly we all became a part of it.
My dad used to work as a corrections officer at a rural prison. He drove the perimeter, which means he made circles around the jail in a truck, checking empty buildings for runaway inmates and just generally being bored for 8 hours every night. One night my dad is parked on a hill just reading a magazine when he starts to feel a thumping in his body. He described it as the feeling you get when you hear speakers playing a song with a really heavy bass and you can feel it through your whole body. He puts the magazine down and checks his rear view and sees someone outside the truck. He grabs his pistol out of the truck, weapon drawn. When he gets outside, he sees a procession of Native Americans walking through the truck and directly through his seat, only to disappear at the exact spot he was sitting. He said it was clear they were ghosts because many of them appeared injured. This went on for a few seconds, and then the whole procession vanished. He called the other perimeter guy on his walkie to try and explain. The other guy immediately stopped communicating. Turns out the guy had seen it before, but he didn't believe in ghosts, so he didn't want to talk about it.
There was this guy in my dorm room. He was quiet and mostly kept to himself. He was from my hometown, though I didn't really know him very well. He had just 4 months left on his sentence, practically out the door. Everyone knew it too. He wasn't a problem, not someone anyone expected to snap. Then one afternoon everything shifted. We were out in the yard, just over an hour to go into a wreck. That's when we noticed the guards moving fast, cutting across the walkways into a tight group. That's what they called a red dot, an all-units emergency response. At first, no one thought much of it. Fights happened, maybe someone collapsed, but they kept us outside longer than usual. That's when we saw them. The suits, state troopers, crime scene guys. We realized this wasn't your typical fight. Word slowly trickled out. It had started over a word, just one. A new guy had called the hometown guy a bitch. Prison rule number 1, never let anyone punk you out, especially in front of witnesses. So they met in the bathroom to square up, straight hands. From what I heard, the new guy wiped the floor with him, quick and clean. Thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. The hometown guy went quiet afterwards, didn't mouth off, didn't complain, just disappeared into his head for a few hours, and then he snapped. He opened a can of food in his dorm, maybe beans, maybe tuna, who knows, and folded the jagged lid in half until it was crude and serrated, concealed it in his hand, and waited until he saw the guy again and walked right up to him like he was trying to make peace. He said something like, "Good fight, you got me. Let's break bread." He reached out his hand, and when the guy took it, he pulled him close and started hacking. People said he went for the neck first, caught the cartoroid with the edge of the can lid, and blood exploded across the floor. The guy stumbled back, slipping, gurgling and trying to scream, tried to crawl towards the correctional officer's station, smearing blood across the floor, while the attacker sprinted off trying to change clothes. It didn't work. He was soaked in it. They called the med team and the cops, but it was pure chaos. We didn't even know what happened until hours later when they finally let everyone back inside, and the blood was everywhere. The guards don't clean it. They left us to do it. Mop and a bucket, and the knowledge that we were standing where someone almost bled out over a word. That kid spent 3 days in the infirmary in critical condition, but somehow survived. Barely. They hit the hometown guy with attempted murder and threw him straight into solitary. 4 months of time meant nothing. He wasn't going home, not for a really long time now, all over a single word. That's what it takes here, I guess. I used to work as a corrections officer at a prison in Ravenhall just outside of Melbourne, a facility where the population was split hard along racial and cultural lines. Pacific Islanders, Muslims, Asians, and white inmates each stuck to their own group. The rules weren't written down, but everyone knew them, and everyone knew better than to cross them. One afternoon, a new inmate arrived, a young Asian guy barely out of his teens. Still had the nervous energy of someone who didn't realize just how dangerous this place was. On his first full day in the yard, he walked over to the basketball court and joined a game with the Islanders. Just like that. He smiled, tried to joke, even passed the ball a few times. The Islanders didn't react much, but the other Asian inmates were watching. The rest of us saw it too. The tension. You could feel the atmosphere shift, the unspoken code that had now been severed. And everyone there knew there would be consequences. You don't make friends with the wrong crew and expect your own to let it slide. I came on shift the next day at 3 p.m. and headed out into the yard as the inmates were returning from domestic duties, gardening, laundry, waste management. It was quiet, the way it gets when everyone's pretending nothing happened. But I passed the court and stopped dead. The kid, that same new guy, was hanging upside down from the basketball hoop. His ankles were tied up with strips of his shredded uniform, his pants were gone, and his legs and backside were covered in dozens of razor-thin slashes. It looked like someone had used a box cutter or a smuggled razor blade. Nothing deep enough to kill, just enough to humiliate and make him bleed. I called for backup and started cutting him down, trying not to vomit from the smell. When we got him on a stretcher, he kept insisting he was fine and he just had stomachache. He said it was in the food. His voice shook, but he wouldn't say more. Later that evening, a nurse from medical called me down, said the kid had finally whispered something under sedation. "I think they shoved a bird up my arse." We thought he must have been delirious, but after 3 days in the medical wing, scans showed there was something lodged deep inside him, something organic, and they had to remove it in pieces. It was a sparrow, a dead one jammed inside him, headless with the wings torn off, beak and feet removed. We never figured out how they managed to find it, let alone sneak it back into the unit, or get it into him in the first place. But prisoners are resourceful buggers, and there's no shortage of cruelty there. They used to kill time by torturing stray animals. A sparrow wouldn't have stood a chance. There was no official report on who did it, no inmate would talk. The kid was transferred out not long after, probably for his own safety. I still think about him sometimes, how quiet he was after. You see a lot in this job, fights, stabbings, overdoses, but that was the most depraved thing I'd ever seen. Not just through the brutality, the message it left behind. I've done a fair number of paranormal investigations, old hospitals, abandoned schools, backwoods cemeteries, but none of them have ever gotten under my skin like the Ohio State Reformatory. I went twice. That was enough. Both times we were there for full overnight lockdowns, midnight to 6 a.m. No lights, no power, just our flashlights, recorders, and whatever might be waiting in the dark. The building itself is intimidating, part Gothic cathedral, part nightmare. Massive cell block towers like steel skeletons, paint peels from the walls like old skin, and the cold really gets in your bones. The first time I went, I felt uneasy. The second time we stepped inside, the air had weight to it. Oppressive. We did an EVP session in the chapel, just me and my friend sitting quietly asking questions in the dark. Is anyone here? Do you want to say something? Standard stuff. We stayed for about 40 minutes, but nothing happened. No noise, no voices, just cold silence. At the time, we figured it was a bust. When we got home, we reviewed the audio. About halfway through the session, you could hear something, clear as day, someone whistling. Not random, a tune, like someone doing janitor rounds, mopping the floor without a care. None of us had heard it in the moment, but it was there, and it was close. Then there were the ranges, long echoing rows of cells, stacked on top of each other like a steel hive. Walking those tiers at night, even with a flashlight, is harrowing. It's not just it's dark, it's the feeling you're walking into a space that once held hundreds of men, violent, angry, broken men. It's like that energy has soaked into the concrete. I remember walking along one range and stopping dead in my tracks. My chest tightened. I had this overwhelming sense that I was being watched, not by one thing, but dozens, like there were eyes behind every single cell door staring at me. I couldn't shake it. I covered my hair under my hoodie because of the feeling of being touched. It was too intense to ignore. The second night I only made it a few hours. Around 3 a.m. I tapped out. Something about the place was different. It didn't want us there, and unlike other locations where the energy feels residual, like a recording on loop, this felt aware, hostile, like it could follow you home. I haven't gone back since and honestly don't plan to. There are haunted places, and then there's the Ohio State Reformatory. That place doesn't just scare you, it stays with you. When I was around 9 years old, my parents took me on a vacation to England. Somewhere along the trip, we stopped at a former prison that had been converted into a museum. The prison was old, stone walls, rusted bars, the air feeling damp and heavy. Each cell had been staged with mannequins, stiff, pale, waxy figures meant to represent the prisoners who once lived and died there. They weren't your typical museum dummies. They had blank stares, twisted limbs, and haunted eyes. Some were posed to reenact their final moments. One in particular chilled me. A woman hunched beside a mock well, her face frozen in anguish. The plaque explained that she had drowned her child there, and soon after perished. I remember feeling cold when I read it. From the moment we stepped inside, something felt off. Even as a kid, I could sense it. There was this constant pressure in the air like being underwater. I remember walking through the corridors and being absolutely certain we weren't alone. Not in a crowded museum way, but in a way I couldn't explain. At one point, I stood in front of a cell and froze. I had the clearest sensation that someone was standing directly behind me, breathing, watching. I didn't tell my parents. I was embarrassed and didn't want to seem dramatic, but I was terrified. I remember gripping my mum's hand too tightly, pretending everything was fine. While inside, I was screaming to leave. That night in the hotel, I wrote everything down in my travel diary. I even drew some of the cells and wrote about the dolls and how I hated them, how they felt alive. I described the sensation of being watched, of knowing something was near me just out of sight. I didn't think much of it at the time other than chalking it up to my imagination and the general creepiness of the place. But years later, when I was around 16, I found that old diary again. I flipped through the pages, stumbling across the entry about the prison, and reading it made my skin crawl. I remembered it all vividly, like it had happened yesterday. That suffocating air, the icy drafts, the feeling of not being alone. So I looked up the prison online, and then I saw that it was one of the most haunted places in England. People have reported everything I felt. The sudden cold spots, the overwhelming sense of being watched, even hearing footsteps in empty corridors. Some have even seen full apparitions. I hadn't known any of that back then. Neither had my parents. We just thought it was a neat historical stop. But I'd felt it, without knowing. And something about that realization shook me more than the visit itself. I hadn't been a scared kid imagining ghosts in a spooky museum. I had picked up on something, and to this day, it still plays on my mind. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to let me know down below, as it means a lot and goes a long way. You'll be seeing me tomorrow for some cryptid stories, so be sure to tune in then. I would like to extend an extra thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. Thank you so much for your continued support and contributions. And if you'd like bonus stuff from me, check out the link in the description to Patreon. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow.